and analytics modernization. So we're going to talk about why it's important to modernize your data and analytics ecosystem and how you go about doing so. I'm really excited to have Tony and Kevin presenting today because they will give you insights on this topic, which come from years and years of firsthand client work. So with that, I've been talking way too long at this point. I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Tony.
Thanks, Tracy. So if you've been paying attention to social media for data and analytics over the last couple months, you will know that we are not the only ones talking about data and analytics modernization. It's kind of funny. It's like the portal into all the buzzwords right now, and everyone has their own take in terms of what modernization means today in the data and analytics landscape. So we're going to weigh in on it and bring our perspective, and it's going to look a lot different than I think a lot of the software vendor sort of take on this is from a data and analytics perspective. And mostly that's because we're going to start with the actual modern problems that businesses and organizations are facing today when it comes to data and analytics, as opposed to assuming a solution right out of the gate. So there's a ton of technical demands that are driving modernization. The first thing is volumes of data. So we know that companies are having trouble keeping up with the volume of data that seems to be increasing exponentially every year. And obviously, the different types of data that are popping up. So the days of just having on-prem relational sources are long, long gone. And older analytics systems can have trouble playing nicely with semi and unstructured data sources. Similarly, people are using data for lots of different purposes now versus just reporting or dashboarding. We see streaming, real-time, near real-time, embedded use cases, advanced analytics, bidirectional, where you have write-backs. It's growing and becoming much more common for organizations, even that are less mature in their data and analytics lifecycle. We see lots of different types of architectures, and they're getting more and more complex. So data sources have been on-prem and in the cloud for a while now, but now organizations are having their source systems, their data warehouses, their operational systems, and everything split between multiple clouds or on-prem, hybrid, right, or some combination of those, which just adds to the problems, the modern problems that they're facing today. How do you manage all that architecture? And the last thing from a modernization perspective is all this innovation and new tech is causing there to be a scarcity of talent. It can be hard to find people, let alone to maintain your old stack, but keep up with all the rapidly changing demands that are in the marketplace in terms of skill sets and technologies. And just trying to stay on top of everything is a full-time job in and of itself. So we know that the technical demands that are driving this conversation are prevalent, but there's also business demands driving modernization. And some of these are the same problems, just restated from a business perspective. But at the end of the day, right, the explosion of data is an opportunity for organizations because there's competitive advantages hidden there. If you can access, use, store, transform, analyze more data, you can beat competition to market, or at least get the edge on them in terms of information, in terms of your competitors. The variety of data sources is growing constantly, and again, this is not just saying from a semi-structured, unstructured perspective, but just the fact that you have 17 different marketing systems now that are keeping track of your customers. How do you keep pace with ingesting all that data and figuring out what is duplicative and what's our source of truth, and how do we bring it all together? That's a really common business problem we're seeing today. This next is about high quality and real-time information. The high quality part's not new. We want to have the best data available, but as you have more and more source systems and more disparate source systems in particular, the demands for data quality are increasing more and more because it's hard to get very high quality information. And obviously having data that's up to date or in terms of real time or near real time gives you that competitive advantage as well. Advanced analytics is becoming more and more prevalent. It's kind of been on the horizon for most organizations. At a minimum, though, people need to be planning to have a foundation in place to be machine learning or AI or advanced analytics ready. Even if you're not actively doing that in your organization today, you need to be ready for that wave, because as the technical barrier continues to drop, it's going to become more accessible to organizations, and you don't want to be left behind in that. And then again, right, everyone wants to get their hands on data. It's not just an IT function. Everyone in the organization is becoming more and more data literate, and they want to be able to have more control over slicing and dicing their own data. So when we're talking about this webinar today, what are we actually bringing to the conversation in terms of answers, right? So how do you solve the modern data problems that you're facing? The old way of doing things is clearly not keeping up. It requires modern thinking and modern strategy to adapt to your modern data problems. And we'll definitely talk about technology today, but this webinar is not just going to be, here's the 17 hottest techs that you need to adopt to be successful in your organization. So to start, let's just say, what is data and analytics modernization? What does modern mean right now? Because obviously what is modern today may not be modern tomorrow. So like I said, it's not just a single action. It's not just implementing some set of tools. Really what we're talking about is rethinking about how you approach data and analytics as a company, as an organization, from a cultural perspective, right? People characterize modernization sometimes just moving to the cloud, or you adopt these 3 tools and now you're modern. And there's some truth to that, right? But at the end of the day, modernization is all about leveraging modern data management and analytics principles. So yes, it's moving from legacy databases and architectures to modern cloud-based platforms, right? And from an analytics perspective, right, using modern tool sets to be able to get returns on investment in your data. But at the end of the day, right, it's much more than just tools. It's about your principles and how you approach the modern data problems that you're running into today. And the benefits are clear. If you can adapt and you can evolve as an organization, there's all kinds of benefits. Obviously for the cloud, you have speed in terms of performance. You can scale up and down to lower total cost of ownership. You can rapidly prototype. You're not having bottlenecks in terms of operational limitations. There's a huge benefit there to modernization, and just to all data in general in terms of how you manage your data overall. If you can process data quickly and turn data into information, you have a competitive advantage. Clearly, in terms of democratization, right, if you can make it available in the cloud, or you can lower those barriers of technical competency to get access to quality data, that's a huge benefit. And obviously, like I said, planning for the future and having a foundation in place so that, if you adopt 3 tool sets, those are going to be legacy tool sets very quickly. So what are the things that you can do today to future-proof or plan for the future within how you're approaching data and analytics, not just for AI and machine learning, but also in terms of modularity of your data stack and being able to take advantage of the newest and best innovations that are happening, it seems like even more and more rapidly than ever today. So how do you get there, right? What are we actually talking about? There's 5 pillars to this that we're going to cover, and we'll dive into different depths of this, and certainly, right, each of these can be their own webinar. But really, we're talking about a balanced approach. So, moving from data strategy to data architecture. What do we mean by data management and data governance, and what is a modern approach to that? Because those sounds like terms from the 80s and 90s. Right? What analytics tools are going to help you be successful, and what are the people and processes approaches that you can modernize in your organization to get there today? So let's dive into each of these pillars individually. We love starting with data strategy. Anytime you start on a data and analytics initiative, it is by far the best thing that you can do to start with a plan. What we mean by this, right, is setting up the foundation and the guide for for your organization in terms of how you approach data and analytics. Again, not just tech, but from a people perspective, who do you need on board to be successful? From a process perspective, what do you need to change in terms of your business processes to make sure that data is of high quality and accessible, and making sure that your culture and your organization expects you to bring data and information to decisions, and not just kind of go by gut feel. From a tech perspective, obviously, we're going to talk about tech on this webinar. We love tech, and we can help certainly kind of parse through all the different nuances today of an ever-evolving landscape for that. But what's going to help you be successful with data and analytics? And then obviously the data, right? Like from a data strategy perspective, it's great to understand what data you have available to you today, and what data is maybe just out of reach that you can start collecting and leveraging to win today within your data strategy. So if you don't have a data strategy already, or it seems like it's older, it's a great place to start talking about what the business wants to achieve and how data can help you get there. So not saying as a start of a data strategy project, let's do a tool evaluation, right? But first, start by actually talking to the people that are going to use data in the organization to create value, right? And start with the business always, right? From there, then you can move, once you have your requirements, then you can move into the technology aspects of your data strategy. And so really, we know the landscape is getting more complex. We know that this plays a part in the data strategy. But what is really important, and Kevin will touch on this in a little bit too when we talk about analytics, what's really important is that you choose the technology that's best for your organization based on your business goals and your technical requirements. If you try to adopt what's best for a small startup and you're a large enterprise organization, it's not necessarily going to map one-to-one. So when you're reading those analyst papers, or you're following different blogs, right? It's a great idea to make sure you have a clear understanding of what your organizational goals and requirements are before you dive into tech. We love this image here. We call it our tech rainbow. This is kind of a good way to do a gut check, though, right? In terms of what your organization has today. So if you look across each of the different bands, this is kind of the competency areas that an organization can have with technology around their data strategy. And ultimately, right, if you're missing an element of this based on what you currently have in terms of your tech, this is a great way to identify where you might have gaps and possibilities to innovate in the future. Once you have that data strategy in place, then you need a plan to how to actually execute that strategy, right? So when my role is the VP of data management, that's what my role is all about. And oftentimes when we hear the word data management, again, people think data architecture. But a really important thing that I want to convey today is modern data architecture is just one part of modern data management. Modern data management is a lot bigger concept than just the architecture that you adapt. And again, right, we want to come back to the principles that drive this discussion. So it's not just an architecture, it's not just a tech, but it comes back to the fact that you need to have principles defined for your data. And these are some of the pillars that we recommend that organizations adopt today to help them move towards a modern approach to data management. Obviously, data needs to be accurate and it needs to be available to the right people at the right time. But beyond that, right, we love talking about the concept of having all of your organization's data together. And that sounds super pie in the sky for some organizations, but there are different approaches that you can take today that allow you to be able to bring all of your data together from different places to be able to have more and more context and de-risk people in your organization going to source systems directly, and the security implications of that and the tech stability aspects of that. You can bring all of your data together. There are ways to do that in a manageable way if you take a modern approach to data management. And I know it sounds crazy, but there are ways to do that now in terms of how to model data, to optimize it for ingestion, to bring it all together. Obviously, agility is a huge part of a modern approach to data management, right? If it takes you months to be able to bring in new data, you don't have a very modern approach to data management. if you can't ingest certain types of cloud sources based on your legacy stack, you don't really have a modern approach to data management, right? You need to be able to have a plan for how you're going to take advantage of tech and innovations as they become available, right? The agility also applies to your tech stack. How quickly can you swap out components of your tech stack versus where are you vendor locked today, right? All of that plays into agility. From a risk management perspective, data management definitely handles risk. And when we talk about risk, we really think about it in terms of poor data quality or in terms of security risks, right? In terms of the wrong people accessing the data. So risk management can be handled also from a perspective of thinking about, you know, what's the cost of poor decisions today based on poor data in your organization, as building a business justification for taking a modern approach to data management. And, you know, what would be the business cost to you to have your organization's name on the news because you had a data breach based on not adopting best practices when you're moving to the cloud, right? Risk management is a key part of modern data management that needs to be considered from a principled perspective. And then the 3 S's at the end there really comes down to architecture again, right? So scalability, stability, and security. The idea here is your data always going to be available to the right people and only to the right people at the right time? Do you have failover mechanisms so you know you have peace of mind that your critical business systems are going to be there when you need them? Right, all the benefits of the cloud. And also from a FinOps perspective, are you able to control costs today and invest costs in things that are going to derive value with data and analytics as opposed to just maintaining, you know, servers and stuff? So all of these things work together, right, to form these modern data management principles. And how you apply that may look different for different organizations. It's not that, hey, everybody needs a data lake and that's what modern data architecture is or modern data management. The idea is whatever you're defining for your architecture and for your data management principles will end up driving what your solution to this problem looks like today. So at the risk of making everybody think that this is a data architecture thing, I am going to talk a little bit to data architectures that we're seeing today that organizations are adopting that are being called the modern data architecture. And I just want to break this down a little bit. So this diagram is a popular one we're seeing right now. Being referenced frequently, and it's a great diagram because it really gives a full picture of what the back end of your data and analytics stack looks like for organizations today. Somebody that you consider to be a mature, modern, adopting a mature and modern data architecture. So obviously you have all kinds of different sources here, and you can see structured, unstructured, semi-structured data there. You have this ingestion and transformation layer where you're seeing the rise of the data connectors. You're seeing the rise of the workflow managers. You're seeing the data streaming, event streaming, stream processing, batch processing, right? From an open source perspective, we're seeing Python today for ingestion and transformation. So breaking it down into, there's a lot of different tools that you're taking data from source and replicating it somewhere else, right, into storage. So oftentimes we'll see organizations adopt a data warehouse or a data lake or both or some combination of the two, in terms of making sure that that data is widely available. That's where we talk about all of your data. How do you get all of your data together? But the big thing here is we're seeing where organizations are building highly governed and less latent pathways to data. So really, again, this comes down to your business requirements. It's this diagram. When you read this diagram, you shouldn't think, oh my gosh, I really need to have a data lake or else we're going to be way behind the times. Right. What needs to happen is you need to look at your organization's business requirements, understand the requirements around the size of your data, the latency requirements in terms of how real time does this data need to be for make us successful, and then work that back against your architecture to understand what are the requirements that you have in terms of these different components. The second thing I want to call out here, you'll notice the data warehouse is still a central component of a modern data architecture. We've been following Bill Inman's blogs lately, having lots of great commentary around you know, the fall of big data and the rise of the data warehouse. The idea here is, again, we're believing that we should have governed components in our data architecture. That hasn't gone away. Now, how that plays out, the the concept of a data warehouse is still a central component, but it may not look the same for organizations today as technology is evolving. The idea here is you want to have a place where you can bring disparate data together, where you can apply business logic and governance to your data and make it available in pre-curated formats. But the problem is that can be a more latent approach, right? So you still need to be able to create opportunities to be able to stream data, to be able to do real-time analytics. And certainly from a prototyping perspective and a speed of business perspective, there's value in not having to wait for everything to go through that highly governed process to make that data available to people to be able to be agile and respond to business opportunities. But what I like to say is, and we'll talk about this in a second, but what I like to say is you should be constantly seeing these workflows where you have these prototyping approaches that are being built off of your less governed pathways, rolling back into your governed pathways over time. Because governance is a program. It's not just a project. So, and I'll touch on that again in a second. The last bit here is you'll see tons of different tech underneath this, and the big concept here is a modular approach is more resilient and opportunistic. So by breaking these components out versus relying on a single vendor across all of this, will help you respond more quickly to opportunities in terms of tech advancements. So, when we talk about, again, this architecture approach, the big thing I want to break down for everybody today, and maybe this is the one takeaway you have, is the concept of a data lake and a data warehouse can stop there. They can be conceptual. We're seeing advancements now with cloud data platforms like Snowflake, where really you can have data-like behavior within your cloud data platform based on variant data types, for example. The thing here is building what we call a persistent staging layer, where you're replicating data from sources, you're bringing all of it together to match how it looks in the source system first, and then potentially exposing that to different people in your organization that are analytically capable or data literate, so that you allow for innovation and agility in your organization. That's a key part of modernization. You don't want to be a bottleneck for business users wanting to innovate, but there is still some value in making sure that you have governance and security even around that data lake. I talked to somebody today who talked about how their data lake is turning into a data swamp, which is very common, right? So you still need to have governance in that data lake, but the idea is lightening up on the governance to be able to make that data more available to people more quickly. But that data warehouse off of that conceptual idea of a persistent staging layer, a data lake, is also important to make sure that the business is responding well to change over time, and making sure that that's documented and that people are using common definitions. On the other hand, versus a cloud data platform like Snowflake, we're also seeing tech like Databricks Delta Lake, where the concept of a data warehouse is actually being brought into the data lake as a service. So you don't have to necessarily look at these as two separate physical technology stacks anymore. The lines are starting to blur, but the concepts of what we're talking about here in terms of a persistent staging layer or something that's behaving as a data warehouse are key to how you're actually approaching your data management. And from there, right, it's all about how are you deriving value from your data using analytics, because that's the most important thing, right, is making sure you're getting value out of your analytics. And Kevin's going to spend some time now to make sure that we cover off on that part of it, which is the most important part in generating value from your data.
Okay. Thanks, Tony. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Cool. All right. So now that we've shed some light on the principles of modern data management, how does the concept of modern analytics fit into this framework? So if we think of data management as a means to maximize the value you create from data, then we can view modern analytics as the vehicle that really turns that data into meaningful information. So think of the reports and applications that you use on a day-to-day basis to find actionable information. But it's really not so clear-cut where to start. So as the idea of the modern data stack has grown, the options, the approaches, the tools that are available to choose from have also grown. So sometimes just kind of choosing where to start in your analytics modernization process can feel just as daunting as the actual implementation itself. But as Tony referenced, it's really important to think in the context of organizational use cases to really help narrow your focus. So what you're seeing up on the screen right now is the 2021 Gartner Magic Quadrant. So for those of you unfamiliar, this is an industry standard evaluation of some of the major analytics players in the marketplace. If you were to go back and compare this to the 2015 Magic Quadrant, when I first started at Analytics 8, you'd likely see some of the same vendors on here. But by and large, there's been an influx of new vendors and new tools that have really pushed the capabilities of the modern analytics platform. But again, it goes back to that question, where do you start in choosing the right modern analytics solution? So thinking in terms of your organizational use cases and requirements is going to be the best place to start. So if your organizational analytics and your requirements are centered around traditional enterprise reporting, then starting with the leaders quadrant in the top right-hand side is going to be a safe bet. So Qlik, Tableau, Power BI, all three of these have market longevity. They all have robust cloud capabilities, active user communities, and the R&D investment backing that really allows for just continual feature releases. These can be considered the tried and true options. They have the industry experience and the depth to back up most customer use cases. Now, if you're looking for analytics that really lends itself well to a hybrid approach in your modern data stack, then an emerging challenger like Looker might be a good fit. So Looker positions itself as a modern data platform. It's great for self-service analytics, guided analytics, as well as embedded analytics. Now, if your focus is solely on embedded or infused analytics, a visionary like Sisense or a niche player like AWS QuickSight are going to be great fits. So these two tools in particular are major players in the embedded analytics space, but they can also work well in a traditional enterprise reporting setting. Regardless, it's important to remember that these tools all have their own respective strengths and weaknesses. They all have nuances in terms of back-end integration. But don't simply focus on the strengths and weaknesses of the tech itself. There are really some fundamental questions and concepts that you should be asking in the migration process itself. So the analytics migration process is an especially relevant topic for me, as I've been a part of a lot of recent sales situations where this exact scenario is played out. So for customers that are starting out on the migration path, I always like to focus on 4 core areas in the process. So number one being pick your modern analytics tool. It sounds relatively simple, right? But one of the biggest mistakes I see organizations make is going through a rigorous tool selection process only to choose a solution because it's the most aesthetically pleasing on the front end, or the price point is just too good to pass up. It's really critical to remember that your analytics solution is not just simply a standalone tool, but it's part of an end-to-end modern data stack. By locking yourself into an analytics solution that isn't a natural fit into your data architecture is going to set up significant development hurdles before you even start the modernization process. So if you're building your modern stack on a cloud platform like Azure or AWS or GCP or Snowflake, really take the time to consider how each analytics tool fits into these respective architectures. One thing that we like to do in Analytics 8 is manage bake-off processes or pilot projects. This really helps our clients kind of cut through the noise, determine which tool best accommodates their own data and their own organizational goals. So typically in a bake-off process, we evaluate strengths and weaknesses of each option. We conduct scoring on a battle card. But at the heart of it, taking the time to conduct a 4-week pilot project that utilizes a sample of your own data, that's going to help prove out functionality of analytics tools better than any vendor battle card ever will. I know it sounds extremely hokey and cliche, but I always say approach the modernization process like you're purchasing a car. You wouldn't buy a car without taking it for a test drive, and you should approach your analytics selection process in the same. So the second key point in the migration process is to assess skill sets. So oftentimes the analytics selection process takes on such precedence itself that the question of who often gets obscured. So the who being the people on your staff. So your people have to be factored into decision making because they're ultimately going to be the ones responsible for building, maintaining, and developing reports. It's really critical to remember that a modernization project is not just a shift in technology, it's a shift in the skill sets required within the organization. If your team of developers need to pivot from their legacy platform to a modern analytics solution, they're going to need an enablement plan. They're going to need a training plan, something in place to help mitigate that learning curve. I'll cover this in a little bit, but also consider how to receive training too. Are you equipped to develop a strong training program internally, or are you going to require outside help to initiate? So the next topic I wanted to cover is really narrowing your focus in the initial build phase. So oftentimes when licenses have been provisioned, the new tool has been set up, there's kind of an over-eagerness to just rush out of the gate, boil the ocean, and start the process of moving everything into your new analytics tool. But the reality is that modernization for a lot of companies often means that there are going to be years of analytics reporting that has to be migrated over. So having a migration strategy is really going to help you overcome this task by narrowing your focus on kind of the short-term wins. So think about things like what will be migrated initially, what apps and reports can be finally retired. I would highly encourage you to take it as an opportunity to really triage and revisit requirements that haven't been touched in a number of years. Think about things like, do you really need 10 years of historical data in your reporting, or does 2 years suffice to start? Great place to start is by selecting high-value reports and applications for the initial migration. This is really going to help organically build adoption for your new analytics solution. Things like widely consumed, highly visible reports are going to be great candidates to migrate first. In a recent migration project, it was pretty common knowledge that the company CFO, and as a result the rest of her team, regularly used one application in particular. That report was immediately identified as one of the first candidates for report migration. We knew that it would automatically have executive level visibility. There was going to be a group of users going in there every single day using the report. It was a great avenue to just organically build adoption of the new tool right out of the gate. Finally, the last point in the migration process is to have a rollout plan in place. So when it comes to reporting, the modernization effort is as much educational as it is technical. In order to encourage adoption, a rollout and training plan has to be in place to really educate your end users on the feature functionality of your new analytics platform. Consider something like scheduling a one-day boot camp training with your end users. You want to have structure around educating them on the new analytics tool. Because ultimately, the point I'm trying to drive at is that change is going to be really hard. Users are only going to adopt a tool if they're comfortable using it. So the more you prepare them, the more you educate them, the more guardrails you build into the process, the better chance of success you're going to have in your modernization initiative. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about this concept of the right people and processes. So again, in a migration, the natural focus kind of tends to gravitate towards the technology itself. But it's critical, again, to remember that a modernization effort is not just a shift in technology, it's also a shift in the skill sets required within your organization. There are really some key questions and concepts from a people and process perspective that you should be thinking about. So starting with training and enablement. So training and enablement is core to any migration effort. Rolling out a new tool without any training for your developers or end user training for your user base should honestly be considered a cardinal sin in a modernization project. From my vantage point, there are really two distinct pathways for training and enablement. The first is really your developer-focused training. This is going to be targeted to your folks on staff who will be building, maintaining, and owning your analytics solutions. Consider this your how to build learning track. The second is going to be training and enablement targeted to end users. So this is your how do I use it learning track. It's important to delineate between these two tracks and not just automatically adopt a one-size-fits-all approach in training. What ties into this is the question of how will your organization receive training? So I can tell you that training has been a part of almost every project I've been involved with at Analytics 8. And I can tell you that every single one of those trainings has been different in some form or fashion. Knowing your audience is going to be key to how your users and developers will receive training. So is something like a one-day boot camp or a full week classroom training sufficient? Can a pre-taped webinar or even a process document fit the bill? Really understanding how your people learn best is going to allow you to deliver training that honestly maximizes value. Also key is determining whether or not you have the capabilities to deliver and build that training program internally, or if you should bring in an outside vendor to assist. Another important concept is this idea of load balancing. So in any migration initiative, there's going to be a period of time where your legacy reporting and your modern analytics tool will likely both be live at the same time. Recognizing the demand on time this creates is really essential, and making sure that you distribute the workload effectively across both tools is key. So a recent example that I saw in a migration effort was basically a dedicated internal team that was given 9 months to essentially take ownership on the new analytics tool in order to accommodate the rollout for early next year. Meanwhile, the rest of the team was basically tasked with finishing out all open development tasks on the legacy tool, with the goal in mind to eventually move those team members into new tool development as the legacy apps moved into pure maintenance mode and code freeze. So that's just one way to do it. There are a variety of different methods, but having an idea in mind of how you distribute that workload across tools, it's really going to alleviate some of the burden on your staff. The worst thing you can do is basically throw the new tool to your developers and tell them to run with it. So I highly encourage you to have a plan in place. Finally, the last point that I wanted to touch on from a people and process perspective, and I felt that it was so important, it deserved its own slide, is this idea of don't just lift and shift. So recently, I saw a blog post that said the most important question you should be asking in an analytics project is, what are we going to do differently? And I feel like that point resonates so strongly with this idea. What works in one tool is not simply transferable to the next. So a common occurrence in terms of our project work is being brought into an in-flight migration that really isn't going so well. So once we get systems access, once we get the opportunity to really peek under the hood, oftentimes what we find is that there's been a significant amount of time spent basically trying to force or retrofit concepts and functionality from the old tool into the new tool. So recognize that your new analytics tool is a different animal at the outset, and that you really need to build to the strengths and capabilities in your new tool and not simply try to recreate concepts that worked in your old tool. I know it sounds pretty counterintuitive, but unlearn quickly. Really continually ask yourself how you're going to approach and do things differently in the new analytics tool. Now, I want to make one more point on this topic, and dependent on who you're talking to, this can be slightly controversial, but while you can plan to migrate everything from tool A to tool B, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything needs to be migrated. Now, I understand that there are cost and license considerations to this, but sometimes a report or application, honestly, may be better suited to stay in your legacy analytics solution. I've seen situations where data discovery or query-based reports were kept in the legacy tool, and the more interactive visual-based reporting was built in the new tool. So provided there's a willingness in your organization to maintain two analytic solutions, and I know that that can be a big ask sometimes, there is a pathway forward that isn't necessarily binary, i.e. turn off tool A and turn on tool B, but rather hybrid in design and approach.
Thanks, Kevin. So just to recap here, kind of the big points from the webinar, the big takeaways, the things to kind of think about. For your data strategy, it's really important that you incorporate technology, people, processes, and data all in your strategy. You don't just look at just the technology, right? Because there's a risk there that you're not going to have the full scope of what is required in your organization and a strategy that meets that demand. And obviously, right, the second point there is to cut through the noise and focus on what your organization actually needs. Don't just follow the latest blog trend, but look at what is driving your business today and where are the opportunities that are sitting there for you to be able to respond to quickly. And the last bit there is to take a modular approach. That way you can respond to new trends, opportunities, and risks.
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of touch upon a couple of key takeaways too as well. So the first being that, modernization, it's a program and not a project. remember that you're building a solution that isn't built to last per se, but built to evolve. Don't go into the process thinking that this is going to be a one and done project. Really what you're building towards is a flexible solution that's undoubtedly going to scale. It's going to evolve as demand and requirements shift within your organization. Treating it as an ongoing program, it's going to give you the room to evolve over time. Again, you cannot just lift and shift. What worked in one platform is not going to work in another. Understand the strengths and capabilities of a new platform, build to those strengths and capabilities. Don't lose sight of the fact that the goal is to build a solution that's future ready, that's scalable, that's agile, and that also includes leveraging modern data management principles. And then finally, training and user adoption. This is not something that you just say for the very end without any thought. You're putting significant time, investment, and resources into a modernization effort. You're going to want a return on that investment, and ensuring that people are comfortable using and adopting your solution, that's honestly going to be a key one.
So we did get a couple of questions in the chat. If you have any others, please do put them in there. We'll kind of respond to these right now. So the first question that we had was, are industries in supply chain having a data 360 strategy, or is it more siloed around inventory management, demand planning? It looks like other business processes, right? This is a great question, and honestly, for better or worse, we see organizations doing both, right? So taking it one business process at a time versus looking at it holistically. I am always going to argue that a data strategy is successful because you have executive leadership driving change from the top down of your organization. And the risk, obviously, is if you start with just looking at each individual business process, whatever you end up selecting as your solution for data analytics may not scale well or adapt well to the other requirements that you have. So by having that, what you called a 360 strategy, great way to put it, is a great way to make sure that you're capturing all the needs that your business has today, and that you're picking the people, the processes, the technology, and the data that you need to be successful holistically, not just for the short term for one business process. And then the second question that we got during the webinar was around how we handle real-time reporting in that diagram that I shared. I shared two different diagrams. I think the one you're talking about is the data lake, data warehouse one. From that diagram perspective, it's obviously going to depend on how complex your business requirements are and technical requirements for what the architecture is going to look like. From a conceptual perspective, though, what we're talking about there is building a pipeline that would bypass the more traditional ETL framework into a data warehouse to allow you to be able to do real-time analytics where you don't have the batch loading or the overnight processes or multiple hour reloads, right? And for some organizations, that's going to be just as simple as building a data replication layer and that persistent staging layer, that data lake concept, right? Where you can use simple change data capture to keep your data up to date, and then virtualize whatever you're doing from analytics. So you're querying the latest data against that. That's going to be, some people, that's going to be simple enough. Other people are going to need a lot more complicated scenarios around data streaming and making sure that you have the infrastructure and the people in place to be able to maintain that sort of environment. And we've got one particularly great partner that we've been talking to that's helping to lower the barrier for that in terms of technical requirements for people, requirements for data streaming. Be happy to talk to you about after if you're interested. But it's a great question, right? It's not one-to-one, right? It's not gonna, that simple diagram of two boxes it definitely doesn't meet all the requirements. But we're talking about there is the concepts, is not to be distracted by the tech, but think about what your requirements are. Looks like we have another one here. Oh, this is a great one. And Kevin, maybe you can talk to this one. So if you're starting from the beginning, you've got nothing in place except Excel reporting. How do you begin? How do you address that basically as an organization, starting from scratch or from Excel, right?
So, I mean, that's a very common use case. And I think going through the process of a data strategy assessment is honestly what we kind of recommend just from a customer perspective. So it's not necessarily technical per se, but it's kind of intensive requirements gathering. So understanding what your current state is, I mean, it could very well just be Excel-based reporting, but kind of getting a better idea of what you're looking as far as a future state solution. If that's, you know, enterprise data warehouse, if there's a modern analytics solution that you have in mind, really kind of going through the roadmap planning on how to get there, different types of source systems that need to be integrated, and kind of putting in that firm strategy up front that really enables you to get buy-in from everybody within your organization. Typically, like what we like to do in that process is interview business stakeholders, kind of get a pulse on what they're looking for as far as future state requirements, and then basically have that roadmap built out to just kind of accelerate that development life cycle. So that's typically how we start with it, especially for customers that are just kind of starting down a pathway. Going through the idea of going through the concept of an assessment is always just a really good starting block.
Yeah, that's good stuff. The second part of that question was, how do you know you need a consultant to do that or not, right? And I think the big thing there is to look at what your organization's bandwidth is to gather requirements. So, you know, if you have the capacity to be able to do, you know, dozens of stakeholder interviews and do the sort of tech research, if you really like that sort of thing in terms of staying up with all the different tech across the blogs, and you've got a really firm network that you can talk to around building out, you know, real referenceable examples about what's working for people, what are they doing today, what are the lessons learned, right? You could do the data strategy work yourself. That's totally achievable. Obviously, the benefit of bringing in a consultancy is that it helps to consolidate that process, right? So you're getting perspectives from that consultancy or our consultancy's customer base and our network as well. We can bring in more folks to be able to help do those sorts of interviews that are required and document the different use cases, right? You're scaling up your team for that. It can help accelerate the process and deliver a roadmap to help you have a path to success. So it definitely does not require a consultancy, but there's tons of benefits to going with Analytics 8 in terms of the data strategy assessment. It really comes down to bandwidth and what sort of network and you know, trusted advisors you have available to you to make those sort of selections along the way, for sure. Cool. Those are all the questions that we had in the chat. I'm going to turn it back over to Tracy here to cover off a couple items at the end.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So thanks, Tony and Kevin. That was some really awesome content. And also thanks for everyone who did attend today and took the time out of your day to join our presentation. So just before we end, I just want to go over a couple of closing remarks. So I do want to mention that if you are looking for help getting started with a modernization initiative, we do offer a quick start offering. So during this quick start, in just a few weeks, we will help you develop a modernization strategy and roadmap and help even migrate some of your reports if that's something you're interested in. So I will include some more details about this in a follow-up email that I'm sending out. In that follow-up email, I'll also include a link to the recording of the session. I think someone asked about the slides. We usually don't send the slide deck, but we do send a link to the recording that has all this information for you. We'll also include some other modernization resources that you might find helpful. At that point, you'll also have my contact information. I'm actually the one sending that email. So if you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, I always say this on these webinars, but I am a real person, and if you email me, I will respond. So feel free to reach out. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude our session. Thanks again for joining today, and thanks, Kevin and Tony, for presenting. Hope everyone has a good one, and we will see you later. Thank you.